So for this video, I want to talk about some of the hard truths when it comes to qualifying for the Boston Marathon. In October of 2024, I ran a marathon in 2 hours, 54 minutes, and 23 seconds, which for my age, 31, that would qualify me for the Boston Marathon. I also want to say that I've never actually run the Boston Marathon, but I've now run a time which would allow me to apply for and hopefully run the Boston Marathon. For me, it was more about running the time than it was actually running the race. Maybe one day I'll run the race, but at least for now, I'm really happy that I've run the time that allows me to qualify for the race. And hopefully in time, I can get my marathon personal best a little bit faster than 2:54. I definitely feel like I have it in me, but at least for now, I'm really happy with that. So for this video, I want to break down some of the hard truths when it comes to qualifying for the Boston Marathon. I think with the way social media is lately and running content creators are, they make running a sub-3 hour marathon look really easy. They make running the Boston Marathon seem like it's this, kind of easy everyday thing, when in reality, it's definitely not. I don't know if this was the book Born to Run or in David Goggins' book, but it says less than 1% of runners will actually qualify for the Boston Marathon. The reality of that is that qualifying for the Boston Marathon is probably the hardest thing that you're going to do as a runner. I personally know many runners who have tried for years to qualify and have just never gotten the time. And the reality is that happens for a lot of people. They just try many times and they just never get the time that they want because it is so difficult to do. Also, before this video continues, I want to say that it is currently minus 14 here in Toronto right now. So it's pretty cold. So that's why I'm wearing so many layers here. But yeah, when it comes to the hard truth about qualifying for the Boston Marathon, it's something that I know a lot of people initially really want to do when it comes to running. And the reality of that is it's not something you should initially focus on because it's not something that's going to come easily. I have been pretty heavily into running now since the summer of 2024, and it took me over 4 years to qualify for the Boston Marathon. With that being said, it wasn't my primary goal, and I think that's what's really important when it comes to that. I had other goals like running faster 5Ks, running faster 10Ks, and my favorite distance, which is the half marathon, which kind of became my priority. I tried really hard to get my times faster in those races. I remember when I first kind of really started getting into running in the late summer of 2020, and I went for an all-out 5K. I ran it in like 24 minutes. It was like, I don't know, like 4:40, 4:50 a kilometer. I remember knowing at the time that I needed to run a 4:15 a kilometer or faster for a full marathon. I thought that was impossible. I never thought I could do it, but slowly over time, I was able to get my paces faster and I was able to run the time needed. So with all that being said, what does it actually take to run a qualifying time for the Boston Marathon? How do you actually achieve that goal and how do you get there? The truth is, it takes many years. And unless you're a complete exception, it's going to take you a long time, a lot of training. It's going to take relentless consistency, discipline, running when you don't want to run. And there's going to be a lot of failures on the way, which is totally fine and totally acceptable. I think that what we see online with a lot of, content on YouTube and Instagram is not necessarily all the failures. There are definitely some channels that show the failures, but there's a lot that just show the successes and how easy running can be for some people. And I wanted to make this video to really break down the hard truth of that the average person is probably not going to be able to qualify for the Boston Marathon. But if you're trying to qualify for it, then you're probably not an average person anyway. The way that I achieved it was kind of unknowingly. I had to go into a blind not knowing if I was ever going to do it. And I was able to do it by just slowly building my volume and mileage over the years. I had to really learn who I was as a runner and understand what worked for me and what didn't through a lot of trial and failure. I had to prioritize other distances because for me, when I first got into running, as for many people, the idea of running a full marathon seemed crazy, and going for 30+ K long runs didn't seem like something that I really wanted to do right away. And the hard reality of that is that if you want to qualify for the Boston Marathon, you have to be throwing down 35K long runs, if not longer. And you have to be doing that consistently for not only 16 weeks in the one training block leading up to it, but for multiple training blocks before, probably building up to years before, of consistently stacking training blocks. It's not something that the average person is just going to do after 1 or 2 training blocks. It's going to be like 5 or 6 or maybe even more, and just stacking training blocks on top of each other and stacking years and stacking experience and just learning, like I was saying earlier, what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Some advice that I'd give: don't try to run too fast. Definitely try to run slower. Don't worry too much about pace for the first probably year or 2 of running. Just run whatever feels comfortable and build that volume and just get the mind kind of calloused, as David Goggins says, to just running more often and slowly increasing that speed, slowly increasing the volume, and then slowly mixing in workouts. And again, the reality is that it's not something that there's one answer to. Everybody's going to be different when it comes to it. But the one thing I truly believe is that consistency and discipline are the 2 things that are going to get you there. You're kind of going to have to go into it unknowing. But I think that's kind of the exciting thing about running. It is kind of unknown, and you have to take risks and take challenges. And the truth is, qualifying for the Boston Marathon is incredibly hard, and there is no one right answer to it. Little things that I did along the way. One of my early goals when I started kind of getting into running first was to run a sub 20-minute 5K, which took me, that was the most trial and error that I had. Probably took me almost 2 years to just get to that sub 20-minute 5K. Then after that, I went for the sub 40-minute 10K. And then after that, I went for the sub hour and a half marathon. And that one was a big one because it was obviously running the time you need to run a sub 3-hour marathon for the half marathon. So it was good training for me to understand what the paces was like. And then even after that, it was still another year and a half before I finally built the confidence in myself and was able to put the discipline in to put the training block down to then go and attempt at running a Boston Marathon qualifier. I also want to say that I've only ever run 2 marathons. My first marathon was in October of 2022. I ran 3 hours, 45 minutes, but the goal was just to complete it. And it was an incredibly hard experience, probably one of the hardest I've ever done. So that's why I backed up a little bit. I reset, refocused in on some shorter distances and was able to build some speed. And then throughout last summer, I put down a nice 16-week training block, which was relentless, tiring, and incredibly hard, and way harder than the race itself. I think that the training block itself is where the time kind of comes in. The race itself is almost in a weird way the easiest part of it. As I keep saying in this video, the reality is, the hard truth about qualifying for the Boston Marathon is that it is incredibly difficult. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of consistency, discipline, and honestly a lot of belief in yourself. But I do believe that it's possible, and I believe that if you really want it, you can do it, but just understand that it is going to change who you are as a person. You're going to learn a lot about yourself and how much you're willing to push through some really uncomfortable, hard situations. And I think in the end, it does make you a better person. Even if you try and fail and that's it, but at least you'll learn who you are. And if you continue to try and fail, you will eventually succeed. So overall, the hard truth about qualifying for the Boston Marathon is that it's just really hard. It takes a long time, a lot of consistency, a lot of practice, and listening to yourself more than others. I think that you can buy training blocks, of course, but I think deep down you have to listen to yourself, trust yourself and what feels right. And if you continue doing all that, you can qualify for the Boston Marathon, as impossible as it might seem.